I'm professional. I write things down. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, Patronosaurus Reads. I'm Katie, aka Patronosaurus, and I read, and it's been a minute, so I'm gonna quickly explain why I disappeared. I traveled for work, I went to a conference, and my laptop got a little dinged up on the flight. So I had to take it to a store to get them to fix it, which they did. It was fine, it was a really easy fix. They just had to replace my screen because it got a little cracked. And then I went home for Christmas, spent time with my family, and as soon as I walked in the door, my dad was laying on the couch and he was sick, and I was like, okay, great, I'm gonna get sick. And I did. So even though I got my laptop back and I was able to edit videos, I didn't really want to film or edit or do anything besides lay on my couch and watch scary movies and The Witcher. So I'm fine now. I just spent a couple of days feeling absolutely miserable, had a cold, but it's fine. So before I wrap up 2019 as a whole, I wanted to give you my December wrap up. So then after this, I'm going to be uploading my 2020 goals, and then you will get my most disappointing, most surprising, worst, and of course the best books that I read in 2019. So that should take us basically through January. But like I said, I want to wrap up December before I move on to like these whole year videos. So that's what we're doing today. So let's go ahead and get started. In December, I read 12 books. I averaged 159 pages per day, which it was all audiobooks, my friends. Once again, I have read like 3 physical books in 1 month, and it's like all audiobooks the rest of the time. My average rating was a 3.42, so it's like very middle of the road. So let's go ahead and talk about the books that I read. I read 3 2-star books, the first of which was The Right Swipe by Alicia Ray. Alicia Ray? Alicia Ray, right? This was a book that I thought it was going to be kind of like a hate to love, about this app developer, these like 2 competing like dating apps, and then like the guy and the girl from like the different ones like have a thing. That was very bad. A very bad synopsis, but this book was just like horrendously boring, which is why it was 2 stars. And the big thing to me that was unforgivable is like, I feel like it was very heavily advertised as hate to love or enemies to lovers, whatever. Like, you know, if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know that's my shit. I love that trope. It's the best trope. The inherent tension is just a gift. And they like got over their like dislike feelings very quickly, and there was none of that tension that I love. My next 2-star read was In the Hall with the Knife by, I do not know how to say this lady's last name, Diane Peterfreund. Yeah, sure. So if you couldn't tell by the title, this is a like modern day Clue adaptation, like the board game Clue. I got this from NetGalley, by the way, so thank you to NetGalley and the publisher. I never look up who the publishers are before I talk about a NetGalley book, so very sorry, but whoever you are, like, thank you for giving me access to this book. I just wish it hadn't kind of sucked. It's a YA mystery, which I feel like it's pretty well known that young adult mysteries tend to not be as good as adult mystery thrillers. It was, again, boring. Like, the pacing was really off. It was like a good third into the book before the murder happened. And I'm like, okay, if the whole point of this is the murder mystery, I feel like that should have happened a little bit earlier, and maybe we could have talked about the characters' backstories and like flashbacks or something. I just felt like the structure and the pacing wasn't very good, and it was super obvious who the bad guy was, like, really early. Like, super early. The characters themselves were interesting enough, at least most of them. And a lot of them did have like their own secrets. So it was kind of like red herrings of like, oh, does their weird backstory thing have anything to do with the murder, and eventually figure out who done it and why and blah, blah, blah. But it was pretty clear who the killer was fairly early on. And so then I just spent the rest of this book, like, listening to these teenagers be stupid when all the clues were glaringly obvious. And it was just irritating. Okay, and then my last 2-star book was Enamored by Gianna Darling, which was a sequel in a duology of smutty books. And the first one I liked because it delivered what a book that has naked people on the cover says it's going to deliver. I will say right now, like, this whole series is, like, exploring human trafficking. Like, the main character is literally bought by the love interest to, like, pay off her family's debts and, like, forced into sexual slavery. This is a very dark romance. If that's not your thing, don't read it. Spoiler alert, I gave the first book 4 stars because it did what it said it was going to do. And then the second book, which is this 2-star one, was, like, not smutty nearly as much as I wanted it to be. And this author was, like, trying really hard to do, like, a good plot. And it was not a good plot. With, like, a lot of international intrigue and secret societies and blah, blah, blah. But, like, so many ridiculous things were happening. I was, like, just exhausted. I feel like it took me forever to read this book. So I guess I can applaud the author for her efforts in trying to do something a little unusual and different and, like, build a story. It just was not a compelling story. Moving on to 3 stars. I only had 1 3-star, which was a reread. I also forgot to mention I was rereading a lot of books this month. So I decided to end 2019 by rereading some old favorites and not so favorites. So this is one that was not such a favorite because it's a 3-star. And in fact, if you've been around for a little while, you may recall me unhauling this entire series because I listened to the audiobook for A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I read this book in 2017, like right when I was getting into BookTube and like really following along with like the popular book series and everything. I was not as critical of a reader then as I am now. But I was rereading my Goodreads review and like 2017, Katie knew what the fuck she was talking about. I was rereading it and I was like, yep, that's right. Yes, correct. Like I still maintain these beliefs about this book. It was a 3-star when I first read it. It's a 3-star now. It's perfectly fine. It does some fun things in like this Beauty and the Beast retelling. Beauty and the Beast is my favorite Disney movie, so like love that. But my main complaint about this book then, that 2019 Katie still agrees with, is that it's kind of boring. Like, it's a lot of Farah just like hanging out at Tamlin's house, wandering around, like exploring the spring court a little bit. And then the actual like plot and like the climax of the book and the bad guy showing up doesn't happen until like the last quarter, and so it feels very rushed once you get to that part, and I wish that it had been paced a little bit more, just paced a little bit better, I think is what I want. Moving on into my 4-star reads, we'll talk about Akamath next, because I read A Court of Mist and Fury as well. I listened to the audiobook for that. And again, 4 stars is what I rated it when I read it in 2017. That's what I rated it now. Again, 2017 Katie knew what she's talking about on Goodreads. I will go ahead and link my Goodreads reviews down below. I don't always write like in-depth Goodreads reviews, but I think actually like my reviews of this whole series might be like my best written reviews on Goodreads. So if you want to read those, go ahead and check them out. A lot of my same things. I really like the character development. For the most part in Akamath, I liked that Farah became more of an agent of herself. I liked the relationship development. I liked the plot. I liked that the bad guy was introduced very early in the book. So it's like, oh, okay, this is like this threat that we're working against and we know what we have to do. And here's like our fucking quest log on the sidebar in the video game. Like, this is what we need to do. So I enjoyed that a lot more. My big issue, I think, was that some of the characters were still not fleshed out at all. I'm thinking specifically of Amryn and Azriel. Like, I get that, like, they're more quiet and reserved and they're like the super scary ones. So I feel like that's just like Sarah J. Maas being kind of lazy and being like, yeah, so I don't have to explain these characters because they're not going to explain themselves because that's not the kind of people that they are. Like, no, they're interesting, but I feel like I know so little about them because they don't talk about themselves. But that doesn't mean that, like, the author shouldn't still do the legwork, you know? Does that make sense? Okay, let's talk about other 4-star books. I already talked about how I gave the first book in that Gianna Darling series 4 stars. So that's what this is, Enthralled. So this is like the introduction of like when the girl gets bought and like does the whole like BDSM slavery thing. If you are interested in a dark romance and that doesn't like super squick you out reading about like this specific inciting incident, I guess, if that's not like something that's a hard limit for you, then go ahead and give it a shot. They're entertaining, but then maybe just don't read the second book and just ask me what happens and I'll tell you. Like, DM me on Twitter and I'll just let you know, because it's really not worth reading the whole like 430 pages. My next 4-star book, I had 4 of them, by the way. I'm like all over the place. Sorry, haven't filmed in like a month. I don't know what I'm doing. It's great. My next 4-star read was Pestilence by Laura Thalassa. So this was another reread. I think when I first read it, I actually gave it 5 stars, and then on this reread, I was like, okay, it's not that good, but like it's still pretty good. This is another kind of a dark romance, just not quite as messed up as the previous one. So this series follows the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Like, they come to Earth and they're like, yo, you guys, you humans, you did too much bad stuff, so we're gonna destroy the world. So the first one who rides out is Pestilence, and he's like spreading disease everywhere. And the main character is the only one who stays in her town when everyone else runs away, and she's gonna try to kill him. And it doesn't work because he's immortal, which like they should have figured. But instead of killing her in retaliation, he like takes her prisoner because he wants her to suffer. But then she gets to know him, and she's like, oh man, he's not that bad, because like it's a romance book, he's shirtless on the cover, like what do you think is gonna happen? And then they bang. And that's the end of the book, is that they bang. No, it's not. Like, stuff happens. I was impressed by this having as much plot as it does, and I thought it was well thought out. I thought the mythology was interesting. Okay, my camera just died, like while I was in the middle of talking, so sorry. I was just about done talking about Pestilence. What was I saying? So I was pleasantly surprised by how much plot there was. I liked it. If you're interested in that kind of storyline, go ahead and read it. Book 2 was good too, and I'm pretty excited about book 3. I think fairly recently they actually released the synopsis for book 3, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty good. So I'm excited. And then the last 4-star book I read was The Arctic Incident, which is book 2 of the Artemis Fowl series by Owen Colfer. And I'm going to not really give any synopsis because, spoiler for my 5 stars, book 1 was a 5-star. So I'm just gonna like talk about what the series is about there. So I had one 4.5 star as well. I didn't really feel like I could give it a full 5 stars, but I really, really liked it. But I was also like, I think it kind of put me in a slump. And that's The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is like such a delightfully well-written and like kind of weird historical fantasy romance thing. I don't know how to say what this book is about. Like, it's about a circus that happens at nighttime. If you are even slightly interested in this book and like weird fantasy, like, I know so many people say that this is magical realism, but like there's definitely like magic in this. I think it's just because it has like the writing style that one would normally associate with magical realism. People are like, oh yeah, it's magical realism, but like I think it's just a fantasy. A very whimsical fantasy, but if you're interested in like any of these elements of this book, would highly recommend checking it out. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Artemis Fowl, which is one of my favorite series from when I was a kid. Like, Harry Potter, the book series, wants what Artemis Fowl has, quite honestly. Artemis Fowl is so smart, like both the character and the books. So intelligent and witty and charming and fun. So this follows this boy genius whose family fortune is kind of in danger. So he kidnaps a fairy in order to get their gold, like to get ransom money from the fairy government. That's the plot of this book. Like, what the heck? It's so good. It's so good. Like, it was just as good as I remember it being when I read it when I was like 10. And that doesn't happen a lot with books that were my favorites when I was a kid. And Artemis Fowl is so good. It really is perfect for like any age. Like, if you are a middle grade reader, if you consistently read middle grade, like, this is going to be a great series for you if you somehow haven't already read it. If you primarily read YA, Artemis Fowl does grow up throughout the series. Each book takes place like roughly a year after another. So by the end, he starts out like being 12, but I think by the end he is like 17 or 18. It has funny adult characters. It has great fairies. It follows all these different creatures and like the really weird mythology. It's just so good. It's so good. Like, I cannot recommend Artemis Fowl enough. 10 billion out of 10 stars. And ingots of fairy gold. And then another 5-star I read, my second to last 5-star of the month, was The Hidden Game by Sally Thorne. Look, guys, I have a physical copy now. I'm so excited. I bought it after Christmas with my Barnes & Noble gift card money because, of course, people gave me a Barnes & Noble gift card. This is my third time reading this book this year. I absolutely love it. It is a hate to love, which I've already discussed in this video, is like my favorite romance trope. It's so delightful. Lucy and Josh work at a publishing house that used to be 2, and then there was a merger because their companies were about to go under. So each one of them serves as the executive assistant to the CEO, and then a new position opens up to be COO, and both of them are applying for it and like trying to get the job and competing against each other, but then also slowly realizing that they don't hate each other as much as they thought. This book is everything. It's so good. I'm so happy to have a physical copy. I can put it on my shelves. I can read it whenever I want. I mean, I could always read it whenever I wanted because I had it on my Kindle. But like, having a physical copy is just different and special and wonderful and lovely. And I'm very excited. Okay, and now to my last 5-star read of the month, of the year. It is another reread. And again, if you have been here for any length of time, I bet you can guess what it is. This is another book that I have read now 3 times this year. And it is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which is another hate to love romance, although their hatred is not nearly as well established as it is in The Hidden Game. Like, they get over it pretty quickly. And it is set in an alternate timeline in which a Democratic woman won the 2016 presidential election. So her son, Alex, there he is, Alex kind of has a rivalry with the youngest Prince of England, Henry, for being like the world's heartthrobs. And they have an incident at Henry's brother's wedding, actually. So in order to save face and prevent any kind of like international issues, they have to pretend to be best friends. And then, as this very pink book might lead you to believe, their friendship, first of all, their fake friendship turns into real friendship that turns into something more. And this book is perfect. Like, I already want to reread it again. Like, I read it less than 1 month, like 2 weeks ago. I read it. And I just want to read this book like forever, for my whole life, forever and ever. Amen. It's so good. It's so perfect. It is a shining beacon of hope in some troubling times. And it just makes me feel really happy. So, wow, I'm getting emotional about this book. So, as I was updating my Goodreads review for this book, I ended it with a quote from my dear boy Alex. And instead of my normal sign off today, as we are going into 2020, Americans, an election year. And this year has already kicked off with a bang, politically, internationally. If you want to take action, you can. As Alex, what is his name? As Alex Gabriel Claremont Diaz would say. History, huh? Bet we could make some. Happy 2020, everybody.